So, Alexander Bard
Hi there, Andrew Sweeny.
is an amazing guy, I was going to say, and here are some of his books: Digital Libido, Syntheism, the Futurica Trilogy, co-authored with Jan Söderqvist. First of all, you believe that we need to come up with a grand narrative, or we're screwed, if I understand correctly, and that perhaps the key to saving ourselves in this very dangerous period has something to do with shamanism, right? And there's
the shamans are usually pretty useless, and they're sort of stuck out in the forest and they're cooking their witches' brews and things like that. But at times, the revolutionary change, when you go through a proper paradigm shift, actually, historically, the shamanic caste, the 4 or 5% of the population who belong to the shamanic caste, are absolutely key. They're the connectors when that happens.
So your theory is that the shamanic caste still exists, perhaps, but less not in a formal sense, or it has to be created, or...
Well, I think if anything doesn't have to be formal, it's the shamanic caste. They're the least organized people you ever find. But when they create institutions, they do so to back up and support truth and truth-seeking. So yeah, churches, for example, or priesthood, before they go corrupt at least, they're shamanic caste. Diplomats are shamanic caste, medicine men of all kinds. But also, the outcasts of society, the brothel madams and the whores and the executioners, all those guys belong to the shamanic caste. They're about 4 to 5% of the population in any general population. You can measure their personality traits. And one of the most interesting aspects of being shamanic is that you don't mind strangers. You don't understand why the rest of humanity is obsessed with their sex lives. Because it's just sex, right? You can fuck anything that moves, no problem. You don't understand why the rest of humanity are obsessed with skin color. Because it's just like, why would you care what skin color you have? It's just skin color, okay? This is typically shamanic traits, which also means that the shamans are the ones that used to walk in between the tribes peacefully, because they were sort of outcasts in their own tribe to begin with. So if they intermarried with or communicated with other tribes, nobody was offended or hurt by that anyway. So when you really needed a peaceful communication between the tribes, you had to go to the shamans. And this is the case if you study tribes today. We have the last remnants of the tribes today in the world, in New Guinea, Botswana, Brazil, Northern Canada with Inuits. These are the places where I've studied for the past 10 to 15 years to check out what the original tribe was like. That's doing proper anthropology. The great thing today is that you can then take all the interviews you did there and you map those communities and discover they were the same in the Arctic and they were the same on the savannah, were the same in the jungle, meaning we were all the same people 40,000 years ago. We're still basically the same. So we've got a model for how the original tribe actually worked. Now we can take the data on contemporary human beings. That's called data anthropology. This is what scientists do when they get access to the data silos at Google and Facebook. And we discover the same patterns jump out of the data when we study contemporary human beings, because we haven't really changed. And that's exactly why in Digital Libido, this book is so instrumental for me and Söderqvist to go back to the original nomadic plastic tribe and check how that worked, what matriarchy was, what patriarchy was, what inner and outer circuit were, what the different responsibilities were, what the different archetypes are, the androgynous go in between these groups, and of course, shamanic caste, which is the borderland between one tribe and the next one. The total population of the planet never exceeded 3 million. You couldn't support more than max 3 million people if everybody was running around trying to find their food all the time. It would have been impossible. Whereas once you had permanent settlements, which in turn required written language, once you had written language, you could create large-scale permanent settlements that actually lasted for long periods of time. And that's in the river valleys of the Middle East and China and India. And you can go to Mesopotamia. And if written language really took off with the Sumerians 5,000 years ago, then 4,000 years ago, Mesopotamia suddenly had half the world's population. It had enormous population growth with permanent settlements. Okay, so once permanent settlements arrive in history, we can have much larger populations and support them because we're actually producing food. And the reason we can produce food which is a higher level of complexity compared to the searching for food and hunting, means we can also support much larger populations. This is what triggered the idea of progress in the human mind. And the first thinker who thinks progress and process was Zoroaster. That's, I'm a Zoroastrian philosopher. 3,700 years ago in the Iranian highlands, currently Central Asia, was way greener then than it is now. Transoxania, the other two river valley system, which is northeast of the, east of the Caspian Sea. Zoroaster appeared, and 3,700 years ago, he formulated a text which is called the Gathas, where he basically says that we're living in a paradigm shift. That's the first time ever anybody formulated some thought like that. And he said, the world is processed, the world is changed, we have to adapt to new environments. But the current move from the nomadic to the permanent settlement means that we have to celebrate the achievement of the permanent settlement, which that it's much more sustainable in the long run. It can create a larger population, and we can build amazing things. Because
it's also much more dangerous, right? It's much more...
It is more dangerous, but at least Zoroaster succeeded in the sense that he built a grown-up man's phallic fantasy, I would say. Grown-up man's phallic fantasy, how you create a better society than the one you had in the past. And this goes back to exactly the construction of the original nomadic tribe. The original nomadic tribe has two types of storytelling. It has the matriarchal storytelling, which is that everything returns to the same. There are seasons. There's spring, summer, fall, winter. Spring, summer, fall, winter. It's very feminine in that sense. Women remember calendars and birthdays, right?
Yeah.
But that's the basic storytelling. The fundamental one we also tell to the children. We cannot build anything unless we have that storytelling in place first. So that's the basic one, the matriarchal storytelling, or matriarchal, if you like, celebrating the matriarchy. And this is the foundation for all storytelling. But on top of that, as soon as we have some kind of abundance in society, as soon as we have more than we actually need, we can afford to dream. And we can afford to dream of something better and higher than we are right now. And that is connected to what's necessary and makes the tribe nomadic. The French philosopher Gilles Deleuze has written a lot about this. He calls philosophy nomadology. The importance of time and process and change in human life, and that we have to move on. So essentially, you need to create a story that says that we can't stay here tomorrow. If we stay here tomorrow, the enemies will attack us and kill us because we're not mobile, and there will no food or no water left. So we need to get on.
That's the Exodus. You said you were writing about the Exodus.
Yeah. This is called phallic storytelling, where the dick points. Okay. That is the story about we're going to get higher and we're going to get better than where we are right now. We're going to go to a better place than this place currently is. And that, because we've consumed all our resources and we live in dry lands, attacked by enemies, and we need to get a safer, better place full of abundance to survive, we need to have this story that tomorrow morning we need to get on the move. This is the phallic storytelling. That's what the entire history of philosophy, the entire history of theology and religion is always the two different stories competing with each other.
So it's transcendence. Can I just have a thought? Is it transcendence against immanence or something like that? Does that make sense?
You could say that, yeah.
Okay.
Well, it is all immanent. Actually, originally it's all immanent. It's not about going to heaven or anything like that at all. The original story, according to Sigmund Freud himself, is that you got the patriarch pulling the tribe. You got the matriarch pushing the tribe. Matriarchy is about pushing. That's why caring and making sure everybody's with you arises with matriarchy. That's why women are totally superior to men when it comes to those qualities. Those are mostly female archetypes. And the male archetypes are more obsessed with getting out and get going because they hunt and they also do the warfare, so they're constantly on the move anyway. Their circuit is way bigger than the inner circle where the women live. The masculine circle is bigger. If you go to the Inuits in northern Canada, you discover they have winter camps and summer camps. The summer camps move in much smaller areas and they're run by matriarchs. And essentially they're child rearing and berry picking, right? And then you got the larger circuit, which is the winter camps. They go much further. They stay with the ice and they kill the seals and they kill the moose and they bring the meat back into the tribe. And that's run as a patriarchy.
So they go into the dangerous unknown, so to speak.
Yeah, exactly. Men take risks on a level that women don't. They physiologically, in nature, take much larger risks. And they also die at a rate that women don't. Women die mostly from child rearing and childbirth and take risks when they give birth to children in the tribe. They did in the entire world until the 1960s, everywhere. But men take risks when it comes to the hunting and the warfare and just getting out there and spying and checking out what's happening. So you get the phallic storytelling, which is the priesthood needs to get the tribe on the move tomorrow. And then you got the matriarchal storytelling, which is the storytelling about the women and the children, basically, that there's a container here, safe space in the center, run by the matriarch. But the condition for you to be part of this container and to be in this safe space run by the matriarch is that when the matriarch tells you to get on the move, you need to be on the move. Because anybody who's behind the matriarch when the tribe moves is dead.
So that was the traditional, let's say, absolute power of women in the matriarchy.
This is the funny thing. When we sort of reinstituting equality in the genders, they will only reinstituting what was absolutely natural to us. It's kind of weird that men should dominate women or women should dominate men for that matter. And any culture where that happens, it's an inferior culture. If you look at the most superior cultures on the planet today, in anything you can measure, like education levels, income levels, etc., you find two groups that stand out. And it's the Parsis of India, who are Zoroastrians, ironically, and then the Jews of Israel.
Yeah. So and there's this
complementary strong patriarchy and strong matriarchy.
Yeah, I would call that complementarity between men and women rather than one being better than the other.
Radical egalitarianism for the benefit of all. So you maximize female talent, you maximize masculine talent, you also maximize androgynous talent between the two. So anybody who's born today is an evolutionary winner. You wouldn't be around unless you had played a role, at least in the original tribe. That doesn't necessarily mean it corresponds to a role you play today. We don't know that yet. But at least we can tell you that anybody born today has a genetic makeup that actually made sense. Okay. That also means that we can go back to the history of philosophy and we can go back to the history of theology and religion and discover that if it was only the phallic storytelling, which is what came out of Egypt, you know, the boy pharaohs of Egypt disregarded everything else and only gave one priority, and that was building the pyramid. Okay, completely phallic, completely patriarchal, without matriarchy, without matriarchal storytelling. Okay, that eventually translated to Platonism among the Greeks. And the West has had the problem ever since that we are being obsessed with phallic storytelling.
So
progress.
Just let me stop you for a second. So that's the phallo-logocentric critique of Western society. You think is justified in some kind of a way? Like,
no, it isn't. I'm with Derrida on Loving the Stranger, and I'm doing a lot of work on that at the moment myself. I think it's shamanic, but I think it's absolutely wrong. Maybe, at least for Derrida, after the Second World War, that was necessary. You have to remember that Derrida was a North African Jew who arrived in France in the 1960s, and we came out of the horrors of Hitler and Stalin in Europe. And Hitler and Stalin are, according to Libido, fake phalluses, but they weren't understood as such. What Derrida misinterpreted was that all phalluses are Hitler and Stalin. They're not.
Right.
He could have gone to his own Jewish religion and studied the concept of the Messiah.
Okay,
Messiah is not Hitler or Stalin.
You're gonna have to explain why Hitler and Stalin are fake phalluses, perhaps.
Okay.
What that means exactly, precisely.
How do you differentiate between the authentic phallus, who's rare, unfortunately, and the fake phalluses, which are many? How do you differentiate between the authentic Messiah and the fake Messiahs? Okay. The fake phallus will give you a short route to your success. He will basically tell you, if you just put on a uniform and hate something, you'll be fine. Hitler did that with the Jew. Stalin did that with the kulak. That's exactly why Ukrainians and Russians hate each other until today, because Ukrainian kulaks were made the Jews of Russia, according to Stalin. So Mao did the same thing in China, and he did it with the Cultural Revolution, one of the biggest disasters in history. Pol Pot did it more than anybody. And this is the interesting thing. Pol Pot, when he did his PhD in France in the 1960s at Sorbonne, which he did before he went home to Cambodia, he was a clever guy, he did his PhD on Rousseau. Not on Marx.
Well, that's what I was under the impression that he was a Marxist, like he learned Marx, and that was the whole story that
I'm a Marxist. I defend Marx. For God's sake, Stalin was not a Marxist. Then impossibly one, but you know, by the time you reach Stalin, there's no Marx involved any longer in Soviet communism. Mao never even studied Marx. Mao read fairy tale books for little boys about old Chinese emperors. He wasn't interested. And Rousseau. Rousseau is the dominant thinker of Hitler and Stalin and Mao and Pol Pot, what unites all four. And that precisely because they unified the people through an abjection, an abject.
Right.
And with Pol Pot, it was so easy that by the time you had Pol Pot in the 1970s, he unified the Cambodian people around the hatred of anybody who wore glasses. They would have killed you, Andrew, and tried to get me to become a communist.
I'm finished. Yeah.
And it did. He killed 1.5 million people using his PhD on Rousseau.
Okay, and you don't blame that on Marx. You don't blame that. You don't think that Marx was too much of, he had too much of a shallow sort of materialistic view of too much based on power and class.
No, I don't have a problem with materialism. I'm a monist. I don't care whether the reality is ultimately spiritual or material. It's just one substance. It's all interconnected. There are no two substances, because you would have to figure out how they connect with each other if you have two substances. That was always Descartes' problem. I'm a radical monist, just like Spinoza, just like Leibniz, just like Hegel, just like Nietzsche. I'm a radical monist. There's just one substance. The universe is one substance. Everything is an attribute of one thing. Everything is an attribute of one universe. And we know.
Okay.
So, no, but I don't care whether it's material or not. We can just call it materialism because we usually refer to that when we speak of one substance. And I'm a speculative materialist, just like Slavoj Žižek is, for example. And that's the area of our work. What we need to save Karl Marx today is because it's unfair to blame Rousseau on Marx to begin with, because he hated Rousseau. The reason why Marx became a great thinker in the 1830s and 1840s was because the French Revolution was built on Rousseau, and it failed. We needed something better. And what Marx does is the same thing that Nietzsche does, but Nietzsche takes Cartesian individualism to its most extreme phase. And he says that you have to be the aristocrat, the noble guy on your own, and to yourself, you have to establish your own ethical substance. Well, the problem with Nietzsche is that he thinks of human beings as individuals. He was wrong from the very beginning. He was too much of a Cartesian, but at least he celebrated the heroic. Yeah. And only those who celebrate the heroic have a future in any human society. We cannot celebrate the victim. And anybody who self-victimizes just turns themselves into their own enemies. That's why all the social justice warriors around today, they're the tiny little Hitlers and Stalins we have today, and they're dead wrong. Yeah. Rousseau never works. Rousseau is the cheap route to success. He's the fast route. He's just like, bitch and complain about your condition, and suddenly you're given the great big tit from the sky. The welfare state or consumer society gives you a damn hamburger, or it gives you a money handout, and your problem is solved. And then bitch and complain the next day again, and you never rise, and you never achieve anything. You become the bottom of society. Marx hated this. Marx called these guys the lumpen proletariat. That wasn't the hero he wrote about. No, what Marx did was the same thing that Nietzsche did.
But wasn't Marx romanticizing the lower, rather than the higher, in a sense?
Never. He hated them.
The workers.
Marx is not Rousseau, Andrew. You have to read Marx to get this. Karl Marx is different from Jean-Jacques Rousseau. Rousseau celebrated the bottom of everything because to him, anybody was a blank slate anyway. So if you wore glasses, you could be killed because you could train the non-glass wearing people to instead be the new upper class of society. This is the fantasy Pol Pot had. This is Rousseau. This was Robespierre. And the terrible history we had in the West is Platonism. And the worst form of Platonism is Cartesianism. And the worst form of Cartesianism is Rousseau. This is what we need to deal with.
So maybe Rousseau is the devouring mother, in a sense.
Exactly, without the father.
Without the father, devouring mother.
Without the father.
But I'm still concerned. I'm still concerned that Marx is a tyrannical, has a tyrannical vision in some sense. But maybe I'm wrong.
No, I don't think it does, because tyranny arrives when patriarchy is led by only one patriarch.
Right.
If you look at military history, all guys who get involved with military learn, you must not trust the one ruler because he's the tyrant. No, we always divide patriarchy between one, truth production, and number two, the physical actual energy. That's the chieftain and the priest, or if you want, the king and the priest. They're always separated. If you unite the king with the priest, you get the tyrant. That's exactly why we in patriarchy keep the two separate. You don't need to do that with the matriarchy. It's usually only the oldest woman of them all at the back, and she pushes everything forward. But patriarchy is run by at least two men. That's exactly why I have the rain god and the sun god. You always keep them separate in all polytheistic religions.
Oh, I like that. Explain that.
Patriarchy has both.
Explain the rain god and the sun god. I like that concept. But
The
what do you mean
sun
by that?
god usually takes out one of his eyes. He's only got one eye because he wants wisdom more than anything, and he protects and looks after us. And he's got the phallic gaze. He's the father in front of whom we all perform to get reality thrown at us.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? The rain god is the warrior who comes home after the ritual, and because he won the war for us, he impregnates the earth. That's why the rain. That's the original god. That's the first masculine god. The rain hits the ground.
Mm-hmm.
And once the rain hits the ground and the ground becomes fertile, you need the sun to give you sun on the fertility for society to grow. Then we keep the sun god and the rain god separate. We keep Jupiter and Mars separate. We keep Zeus and Apollo separate.
So I'm not quite sure why when you bring them together that makes tyranny. I'm not sure if I understand that.
Because you get the corrupt father who fucks his own son's wives.
Why?
That's the tyrant. He loses a connection. He doesn't listen any longer. He thinks he's both truth, absolute truth, and he also thinks he's a chieftain at the same time. This is the ultimate Platonistic fantasy. This was the fantasy of the boy pharaoh of Egypt. That's exactly why it's not sustainable, and that's exactly why it becomes a tyranny. That's why dictators are both at the same time, or aspire both at the same time, and that's not sustainable. And there's no autonomy, no freedom, new thinking, no creativity, no change, no process.
Just
it's
control.
Just absoluteness. The whole system becomes absoluteness.
Absolutism.
You get North Korea. You get North Korea that way.
Yeah. Yeah.
So in Patriarchy, you always divide these two, and you have to. And this is the important lesson of military history. If you started the Mithraic order, that was the religion of the Roman military. From Scotland all the way down to Syria, had Mithraes everywhere. And there was the Mithraic order that was the religion of the soldiers. And they would have 7 grades you'd have to go through. And the 6th and 7th grade shared the top grade. The 6th grade was the chieftain, who all respected. The 7th grade was the priest. And the priest would go into celibacy or possibly castrate himself, not to compete with the chieftain. So then the priest could be above the chieftain. And the way it's usually run throughout history is that the first son of the chieftain is the crown prince to inherit the chieftain role. The second son is adopted by the monastery, and he becomes the next priest. So that's how patriarchy works in a fundamental sense. That's how it worked in any tribe I looked at. And that's exactly what we're replicating in a functioning society that has a long-term sustainable model.
And what functioning societies do you see? Like maybe we can move to what's going on right now.
Well, we're going to have the racist word thrown us over the next 10 years and stuff like that, but we're going to have to do proper culture studies. That's what I do. So I study, for example, I spent a lot of time in Israel, and I studied the Jews of Israel. I'm also studying the Palestinians, because that conflict is completely misunderstood. The Jews of Israel are the original and the accomplished nation. The first nation of Israel in history was the Exodus, the Exodus out of Egypt. Yeah. Moses took the Hebrews to the promised land. He didn't do that through objection. He was an authentic phallus, because he said, we're going to go to the promised land, we're going to race up, and then he built a totem pole and said, this is the direction we're going to race up. Doesn't mean he didn't need to badmouth Egypt. He basically told Egyptians, just let go of us, otherwise God will help us so we can go. We're going to go through the desert, we're going to reach the promised land and establish the first nation in human history. You had 11 tribes that had territory. It had 12 tribes that did not have territory, the shamanic caste. The Levites were given the role of the shamanic caste. They walked across all the territories and carried and held responsibility for truth. That's what the priesthood does. The Levites themselves took that role, which the other 11 tribes had their different chieftains. But you definitely divided the chieftain from the priest. You divided the king and the priest completely. You created the first nation. A federation of tribes. That's what a nation is. And the irony is that when Zionism came along in the 19th century as another one of these nationalistic movements that were born out of Europe, it was by far the most successful one. Eventually, they established the state of Israel, and it's the most successful nation state ever, according to any measure you like. But I love the Palestinians too. And I go to the West Bank, go to Lebanon, I go to Dubai and interview Palestinians. But the Palestinian national identity was invented in the 1960s. It's the most modern of them all. And to me, it's the Palestinians who are the first cosmopolitans. They're the first people who think of the world vertically instead of horizontally. They don't think of the world in terms of territory. They know that farms, we don't care about farms any longer. We don't care about farmland. You can build a fucking skyscraper and produce all the food your nation needs today. You can build it vertically up into the sky. That's what you do in Hong Kong and Singapore. You don't need territory for the first time in history because we've gone digital now and the world is becoming vertical. So if it's becoming urban.
Help me understand here. So you're saying the Palestinians are a sort of virtual nation or something like that?
They are.
Uh-huh.
The Palestinians I work with love these ideas because it explains why they're frustrated with being pulled into this Israel-Palestine conflict, which is a global conflict, and it causes such stress simply because it's really about our time. We're leaving the nation and we're now moving into the global.
Mm-hmm. So
let's keep the nation of Israel to remind us of what the proper nation should have been like, because they were always the most successful nationalists anyway. And anti-Semitism in Europe was just nation envy anyway. So we can build the cosmopolitan society, and I love to do that with the Palestinians. I love to do that with any people out there that have a shared identity, a shared language, a shared history, and no territory. They're perfectly positioned for that. I love Kurds.
Okay, so this is how you see, let's say, the village, or not the village, the tribe in the age of globalization.
Yeah. Well, Marshall McLuhan, he was brilliant, absolutely brilliant.
Yeah.
Well, Marshall McLuhan got it wrong was when he invented the term the global village, because he didn't see three paradigms, he only saw two. He saw the globalization of the village. Well, between the village and the globe is the city. Aristotle's city. Okay, the city is in between. The urban comes in between. So we first were rural through permanent settlements and written language. We became urban through mass media, mass-produced, cheap language, mass-produced from the top all the way down. That's how we built the modern cities. That's how we built sewage systems and electricity and everything we need for a city to be sustainable. We managed to do that starting in Europe 300 years ago. It spread across the globe. The Chinese had almost figured out already they could connect with it, and suddenly we got globalization through urbanization. But the one thing left to do is to move into the virtual. The move into the virtual, which was Gilles Deleuze started working with in the 1960s and 1970s, and that's why I'm a Deleuzean, is that philosophers are there dealing with what does it mean to leave the urban and move into the digital? What it means, for example, that the city itself changes and the city stops being horizontal and goes vertical. And vertical is phallic.
Yeah.
That's what's interesting about it.
That's very interesting, yeah.
Yeah. To begin with, the people who do best in cities are women.
Mm-hmm. Why?
Because women are used to dense environments, because the inner circle in the tribe is a dense environment. That's why women are nitpicking at each other all the time and checking that they're in and not out. Okay. Yeah. The urban environment is incredibly feminine in that sense. That means the first wave of the digital today, we see Instagram and influencers and all these things are very feminine, but they're not going to last. They're not going to be sustainable, because the true digital is going to arrive in the 2020s. It's going to kill all of this and wipe it away. And then we're going to stop being horizontal, instead being vertical. And vertical doesn't necessarily benefit women more than men. It could very much be more of the outer circuit, because the storytelling has to be, you need to be grounded to reach high. Okay? It's vertical. How do you build a skyscraper? You build a skyscraper by spending a lot of time on building a solid foundation, a basement. On the basement, you can build the walls, and then you have elevators all the way up, and then you build the top of the building. And the top of the building is useless if the basement isn't properly done. So that means that even if we all have access to all the world's information in our pockets on our smartphones, that information is at best in your smartphone. It's not in your head, meaning the thing you should do today
is build up.
Is to study.
Yeah.
Learn, and inside your own brain.
Oh, so you're saying, it's sort of discipline. That's how we create the foundations. Yeah. And that needs to come back, because we have this sort of society where everybody is sort of sucking each other's tit in a sense, or.
Well, we created a terrible religion in 1632 called individualism. And it's bigger in America than it was in the world. And all the Americans I meet are kicking and screaming to keep their damn state religion, which is called Cartesian individualism. And the individual version of it is called narcissism. And it's a dead religion, for God's sake. It never worked. Okay, it was the world of sales pitches. It was the world of marketing departments. It was the world of lying about what you're doing to try to screw people and get money out of them, so then make a profit from it. It was the accumulation of capital to try to impress people. Nobody's impressed with that any longer. Nobody's impressed with Americans who are fortunate enough to be wealthy. We don't care, okay? Because in the digital world, none of that counts.
None of that counts.
Digital is the death of both the individual and the collective.
That's
it's
a
the death
radical
of both. It's the return to the tribe, and it's the return to scribal, and it's the return to the monastery. And it's the monastery that wins in a chaotic world because we're moving into a new medieval age. Chaos. That's the book, Digital Libido. Sanchez says that you need to build new institutions outside of academia and outside of the churches that we know today that are more credible than the churches and those institutions are. It uses the latest technology where small groups of people, just because they're clever and smart, can actually have access to the best possible information and knowledge, and they have the wisdom how to use it wisely. And that's why they build the best teams on the planet. And we're all going to come to them and ask for advice. And it's going to be incredibly expensive to get the advice out of them. But those institutions will run the world. They will run truth production from now on.
And how will they differ from, let's say, Google and Facebook and Twitter and all the massive sort of companies that are running the world today?
Silicon Valley and the Pearl River Delta in China are the new landlords. They're the new nobility. They're the new bourgeoisie because they own the resource. They own the data. Data is the new capital. What used to be before capital was food production. Okay, after food production came capital, after capital comes data. They got the data. They don't know how to use the data. Facebook doesn't even know how to run a fucking customer department. They're autistic, arrogant idiots, basically. You know, all they know is to collect the data, but they're going to have to give away the data to somebody who can use it more creatively than they ever do. That's going to take cultural engineers. The cultural engineers is the next section of the netocracy we're going to see grow in the 2020s, 2030s, 2040s. Anybody who studies somewhere between art and technology today and is socially successful is probably well positioned to become a cultural engineer. Go to Burning Man and do products at Burning Man, be successful, you'll probably become a cultural engineer in the process because you're in between technology and art. You're in between Silicon Valley and Las Vegas. That's a good place to be in America right now because in between art and technology, most stuff is going to happen. And that's where you're going to find creative people who know how to use the data. And you're also going to find the people who build the new truth institutions, the new monasteries, who also will have access to the data. That's the first thing they trade in. Because by having access to the data, they can nail it exactly what's going on in the world. And they can prove it with factuality. Because everything that happens from now on our planet, possibly the universe itself, is being stored.
Well, power is data, I guess, right?
Yeah. And we're also figuring out that since information is never lost in the universe itself is a huge storage machine. So all of history is remembered, meaning memory is the big thing with digital, meaning since everything is there now and available, you can check the data. You basically have access to all the world's libraries at once, and you've got an electron that goes through all of them, and within a second he's read every book in the library and found out exactly what you're looking for, and you can then prove it. Meaning we can stop speculating and coming up with wild, silly fantasies and fairy tales, which is what television did with us in the last 50 years. And suddenly television is dead because it isn't real any longer. It's stupid and silly and childish. Well, YouTube is throwing at us increasingly factual reality. Again, it's phallic. Remember, it's phallic. Why? Because with phallic storytelling, you cannot go out and hunt. And you cannot start war unless you're based in reality and you've got a foundational understanding that if I don't know exactly where I'm at and we're hunting, I'm going to get killed. I'm not going to kill the animal, right? So young boys are trained to think factuality. That's exactly why mathematics is easier for guys, especially when they go into engineering. That's why 93% of the world's tech startups today are run by young men. They're doing fine. Okay. Women then run communication departments, very confusingly so. And they run product leadership. They do that well. And they take care of the caring in society. That should be half the value anyway. So they can do okay. But the men are going to kickstart the whole thing and get it rolling. And that's exactly what phallic storytelling is forcing us into digital. That's the exodus we have to do. And then we can have
phallic storytelling.
We can afford it. Yeah, we can have magical storytelling. We can afford it, basically just for the kids. We can't keep telling magical storytelling to the entire population. Wait a second. You remember when Harry Potter came around?
Yeah.
You remember that suddenly there were a lot of grown-ups who spoke highly of Harry Potter. Grown-up people who said, well, I'm watching Harry Potter too. Shouldn't they have been embarrassed
Yeah.
This was a story for 8-year-olds. It's meant for the kids. It's not meant for you. You're a dad. You're a mum.
Yeah.
You're supposed to be way above that kind of storytelling.
Yeah.
It was embarrassing to see Harry Potter becoming a large-scale social phenomenon. It just proved how infantile our society has become.
Yeah. So you're talking about ways to move out of an infantile society.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Digital's going to force it on us, and either we die or we're swept away, or we get it and we can go with it.
Mm-hmm.
This is our relationship with the machines. Either they become our servants, our happy slaves, and they serve us, or they just sweep us away.